one up for discussion is policy 4351. Since the last meeting, there were some changes after listening to our principal that was present at that meeting and hearing some of her concerns. There were some adjustments made to some of the verbiage. If you've had a chance, yes, Ms. Kraybill.
Okay, so I am a little confused. First of all, I missed the meeting, with the principal, so I didn't get a chance to hear firsthand. I was able to talk to some principals after the fact, but so I can't say for certain what actually came out from that. But what I am confused about is that in the packet that Ms. Kadetsky gave us, the wording for changes under letter A is different than what is posted online, and it is different from the March 19th version, and it is different from what I have heard come out of the principal's meeting. And this is my understanding, and please correct me if I am off base, but it was my understanding from the principal's meeting that we weren't going to change anything. And that so whatever is written in our policy right now is what we were going to stay with. So if that is wrong, then somebody please talk me through that.
So I don't know if you want to speak to any of the feedback that we
I can.
If I might go first. I really appreciate the principal's meeting with us. That was way more informative than just one-on-one, but having that group discussion was absolutely helpful. And so I'm super grateful for being invited, and I hope we can do it again. What it came out to me, and the main themes that came out to me is that principals are already contacting parents. Because frequently what happens is these students that are getting suspended are repeat offenders. And so they have that constant contact with parents. They have that relationship where they're talking about the positive behavior interventions that are occurring. I know that there was some concern from principals about if it's an emergency and we have to wait for a parent, that is going to be problematic. And in looking through the policy, we do have that part covered. There is an emergency suspension clause, I guess, in the policy already. So I do believe that is addressed. I think that the change that I asked to be added was that parents were contacted, however that looks like, whether it was a phone call, which again, I believe is already happening. I think this is just a matter of us being transparent with what's already happening. I'm maybe incorrect in my assumptions, but that was why I wanted to add that, so that the public knows that this is already happening, this is what we're doing, and so, because it's not just a one-time thing. You can't simply call up a parent out of the blue and be like, your child is going to be possibly suspended. There's been a relationship developed hopefully between the principal and the parents, and I felt as though this was just reflecting some transparency within what's already occurring. Mr. Hall, did you have anything you wanted to add or say about all of this, or disagree?
So is only because I don't have printed, is the one that is posted online part of this, that's what's being considered? Okay, all right.
This is something different. I'm talking to.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it would be posted differently, so I apologize for that.
So this wording that's in red is what's being considered?
Correct.
Which one did you give him? The board packet? Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like this is still slightly different than what we talked about at the meeting.
Yes. And there were adjustments that were made, yes. Since let me rephrase. I believe that these adjustments were made before the principal's meeting. So any discussion was not necessarily included in this. This was prior to. But I felt that what we had stated solidified and really, to me, I mean, this is just my perspective, reflected that what is stated here is already happening. And you can speak.
The only difference in what is already happening, I would say, than what this says is that there often, and this is what we talked about at the meeting, is the conversation with the child after the incident has occurred. Once the child is in a state where they can have a conversation, and we've used the calm down tools, and they are able to have that conversation with me sitting at the table with them. This says I can't have that, I can't get that child to that state unless the parent is present. Which I don't feel like we had said that was not the general consensus at the principal meeting.
And you're speaking off of the one that has the red writing, not the one that's posted online that has only blue writing. Okay.
No, the one online has red writing.
Yeah, now that I've
Not
seen
in
this,
letter
yeah,
A,
this is
it
the same
doesn't.
as what's online.
Mine does.
Mine doesn't.
I just pulled it
I
up.
just clicked on it.
Yes, Dr. Casey.
I think what you're referring to, because that was my question, is the part that says present at an informal hearing. So if that means that, like Mr. Hall said, that something has occurred, and we're talking about kids that are very young, so you really want to talk with them and help them and actually help them process this information. So if you have to wait for a parent, if I'm understanding this correctly, they couldn't have those conversations with the student?
That was my question.
That's the question that because that's what it appears is the informal hearing, on that first line in the red information.
And if you'll look, it's good that you included policy 4340, school level investigations. As a matter of engaging in the investigation, number 2, in the 3rd paragraph, says offer the student an opportunity to be heard on the matter and to raise any defense the student thinks relevant. And as Mr. Hall has described, that's what he's doing. The student is calming down, and then he's saying, okay, what happened? Well, this is what, this is what Johnny is saying, but what do you think happened?
Right.
That is the informal hearing. That's a part of that investigation process. And not to be able to kind of get to the bottom of it without the parent being present is going to delay. Also, we're talking about K2 students, they're gonna forget. And then it does interfere with being able to get back to instruction if nothing happened. If it's a matter of a misunderstanding, then you can resolve and get them back into instruction. But he won't be able to do that without the parent present, because as it's written, it says they have the right to have the parent or other representative present for that. Basically, it says at the informal hearing, but it means for that discussion, and that's in the investigation. So it seems that that's gonna interfere with being able to carry that out swiftly as it needs to be done.
Madam Chair? Because I think, can we, just a minute, Mr. Vogel, a question for you.
Yes.
What I think, is commendable on the side of the school leaders and the policy is that in 4340, 1 through 4 actually is what they do. This, I'm not sure why they would, and that's what it seems like. There's a process, so it doesn't, I think one of the principals said, we don't just stand over them, we're not doing that type of thing. And when you are, the higher the grade up, there's different techniques to use. So if you are interviewing a kindergarten, a pre-K, or a kindergartner, and that's gonna look totally different than a second grader. And versus a 5th grader, versus a senior in high school, they all look differently. So I think it doesn't, and I wanna say that in that one that's written, we talked about if the person who is, let's say they hit the other child, the child who was hit, you can't talk to that child either. Because you've got to have a parent in front of you according to this, because, well, let me finish, because there could be, let me finish folks. I'm a principal, I'm certified. If there was an altercation and I've got to figure out who started what, how did it happen, and there's a whole group of kids, because sometimes it may be one or two, maybe it's one, but sometimes maybe five. And if they were all hitting, bullying, doing whatever, you're saying that I can't talk to any of those students until I get those parents, because it could be that all five of you have to have a day home. But what it's saying is that I can't converse with any of those students until then. But what the policy on 4340 says is right here. And so, investigate the facts and circumstances related to the alleged misbehavior and hear all available accounts, including written accounts, whenever possible. Then I'm going to skip down to 3. It says, if the student requests that other witness be questioned, talk to them if necessary, if reasonable possible. So yes, that's when you're bringing in other people, and then you're actually finding out, oh, well, it was someone else who actually started this. So then you've got to go, because there's some policy that's written in there that says you could be a culprit who actually started it, and this wouldn't have happened. So now, because you started it, you've got to have a day out. But the policies give you the leeway to actually run that runway to it. But so it doesn't just, it's not as black and white when you're dealing with students. And I just want individuals to know that when those principals were talking about this, that they talked about it from a compassionate level. And it was not in your face, that type of, but I think, and I'm not sure people get that, because it's like, when I send you to the principal's office, you're gonna do da-da-da-da. That's not how it works.
If I could ask, because I know Mr. Vogel had something to say. Mr. Vogel, what was it that you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. I think from what I'm hearing, kind of giving you a lawyer's perspective, is that I think I'm hearing that there's kind of a conflation of the school level investigation and then the informal hearing as to whether to impose a short-term suspension. I think policy 4340 and 4351 read together are best construed as essentially a two-step process. One is, of course, the school level investigations, and that requires school level employees to, question students and question other students, and that happens, of course, without parent participation, and that happens, I'm sure, in all different forms. Just seeing, one child throw something in the classroom and walking up to him or her and saying, why did you throw that? What did you throw? I mean, that happens, as a matter of course. But even policy 4340 on school level investigations does say toward the end, when the misbehavior, this is the second to last paragraph, when the misbehavior may result in a suspension or expulsion, then the procedures provided in the related board policies also will apply, and it refers to 4351. And so that's when you would go to 4351 and say, all right, the investigation is over. Now we have to make a decision as to whether there should be a suspension, including short-term suspension. And that's when a student is entitled to what's described in 4351 as an informal hearing. And so the proposal before the board only pertains to the informal hearing, not to the in-school investigation.
Ms. Barnes, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna mention, and also in 4341, parental involvement in student behavior issues. The steps there, when the principal decides to impose a short-term suspension, they notify the parent, maintain the documents, of course, make reasonable efforts to meet with the parent before or at the time the student returns to school after any suspension. So that parent involvement piece is connected there. But I want to then go back and respond to what Mr. Vogel shared. In reading the pre-suspension rights of the student, back in 4351, that section we're just referring to, a student must be provided with an opportunity for an informal hearing with the principal before a short-term suspension is imposed. That, and it says, may hold the hearing immediately after giving the student either oral or written notice of the charges against him or her, but it's basically the principal saying, so this is what, I've been told. Little Brent has just told me that you, slapped him. What is your response? That's one and the same, because they don't happen separately as you are carrying out, as your principal. They don't happen separately. So you wouldn't ask the student and then come back and say, go through the informal hearing process. Those are really one and the same. And then the only other question I have is what's been asked of me. If a parent, so in the way this is written, and so here's the question. A parent contacts us and says, Brent, my Brent tells me that he was slapped yesterday on the playground, or tackled aggressively on the playground and slapped in the face. And I want to know what you're going to do about it and how soon you're going to tell me what happened. Little Brent's very upset. So you then start investigating, or you start looking into what's happened, and you figure out, okay, all of these kids were kind of involved in a scuffle, and you want to, okay, so I've got 5 of them in the example, and before you engage in that discussion, or before you present them with what you've been told and ask for their response, you have to contact the parents. And let's say a parent says, that sounds good, I know today is Tuesday, I'm available Friday. I want to be there and I'm available Friday, no time before. How is a principal gonna respond in the meantime where you've got a concern that a child was potentially assaulted, but you've also got the due process rights and policy of the accused that's gonna push it out 4 more days before anything is determined? It's just, how do we carry it out? I think in writing, this all makes really good sense, but in action, how do we carry it out and keep from violating it when trying to make a swift decision to protect students?
If I may,
If I might, actually, and then Mr. Vogel. But further into that section, it says, if the student and parent or other representative of applicable reasonably claims the need for additional time to present such persons, I think this is in regards to people speaking on their behalf, the principal may postpone action for a reasonable time. Does that give that flexibility, the reasonable time? Or is that, I mean, I know that's a little more subjective, reasonable time is a little more subjective.
That would be, I would assume, like on a minor thing. So, let's be real. Student brings a weapon. Parent says, I can't come.
Right.
I'm like, you can't stay here. And that's what I'm saying.
Correct.
Like, you can't stay
But that's
here.
what I'm saying is, Dr. Fauci, is that is covered in the emergency suspension. That's not covered in the pre-suspension rights, because the emergency suspension says the principal or designee may impose a short-term suspension without first providing the student with an opportunity for a hearing if the presence of the student creates a direct and immediate threat to the safety of other students or staff, or substantially disrupts or interferes with the education of other students or the maintenance of discipline at school. In such cases, the principal or designee shall give the student notice of the charges and the opportunity for an informal hearing as soon as practicable. And I think that applies to that. Mr. Vogel, maybe? Okay. Mr. Vogel, you had something to add?
yeah, I just want, thank you. I just want to reiterate that I'm still kind of hearing a conflation of the two parts of this, that if there's an investigation that has to be done by the school to figure out what happened the day before and to talk to 5 people, the school conducts that investigation without parent involvement in the investigation phase. The policy before the board only examines what happens after the investigation, when the principal is considering now that the investigation is completed and notice of charges have been provided, the principal is considering a short-term suspension for a child who is 5, 6, or 7 years old under very few categories of misconduct that are left open for the potential for such a young child to be suspended. Only after all of that has been done would there be this proposed requirement to to request whether the parent wanted to be involved in the informal hearing. So it would not require the principal to get the parent's permission before the school can investigate wrongful conduct and question students and figure out what's what.
Thank you, Mr. Vogel. Ms. Bradford?
Yeah. So, Love Our Children has asked us to change policy 4351 to have the principal or key staff member call a parent before they decide, the principal decides to suspend the K through second grade student. That's not what this says. This is different from what that said. But I listened to both Love Our Children, and then I listened on the 11th to all of our principals. And I took Ms. Stackhouse comments, which she gave me after the meeting. She gave me what she said, and we asked every one of those questions of the principals. We asked them, and we got a wealth of information from them. And when they were done, I was convinced that they are doing this. So let me point out that our policy lays out one of 3 sets of violations. So a student under the age of 8 years old or 3rd grade can be given school suspension. We have to keep that in mind. We're not talking about you badmouth the teacher unless it was just an assault or a threat. So there's only 3 sets, because you can't say it's 3 things because they're sets. Possession of drugs and alcohol, that gets you suspended. And right now, he doesn't have to call the parent before he suspends the child. Assaults and threats, he doesn't have to call the principal. The principal doesn't have to call the parent, he can suspend. Weapons, bomb threats, terrorist threats, and clear threats to safety, same thing. That's all we're dealing with here. Now, I asked him these questions, and then the next couple of days we went on a tour doing awards, and I got the principals or assistant principals aside, and I asked them the same question. Now we don't have any ears listening. How do you feel about this? 100% no change in what I'd heard. None whatsoever. So I heard a lot of don't tie our hands. This is a stressful enough situation. We're trying to deal with little Johnny and deal with these other children involved. We've got the 99 kids over here still in the classroom that need to be taught. We're dealing with the 1, 2, or 3 over here. Don't tie our hands. We're gonna call the parent. We're gonna work around if they don't give us their phone number. We're gonna use somebody else's cell phone. They gave us all these answers. And I wished I had transcribed it for you, but I didn't, and my notes are unreadable even for me. There was just so much information coming at me. So I don't want to tie their hands on drugs, alcohol, weapons, assault, and other threats, bomb threats, terrorist threats, and clear threats to safety. I think there is confusion and some conflicting information between the statistics you bring us, the statistic the state gives us, and the statistics we get here. And I think part of the challenge for me was in hearing that students had been suspended for something other than these 3 sets. And Ms. Barnum told us, and I don't know when she told us, but she told us that there had been some downgrading of the coding by a principal who didn't really want to put the most severe, little Johnny, gave a bomb threat. So maybe the principals downgraded a little bit and chose another when they filled out the paperwork. So this might have been just a coding error. And so I'd asked Ms. Barnum to address that with us because I really didn't hear. But I think that's the crux of the problem. And I'm going to make a motion to make no changes to policy 4351. I think it's working. I talked to so many. It was just the most important meeting that we've had in ages to hear directly from the people. And we hear all the time, listen to the subject matter experts. We hear that from that side of the dais constantly. And here's a time when you're saying, don't listen to your subject matter experts. We know better. We know what's best for the kids, not the subject matter experts who are dealing with the child on a day-to-day basis. I asked one principal, I said, how often are you dealing with this? Give me some numbers. I need data here that I can be sure is accurate. And I think the answer was maybe twice a month, maybe. And so I'm hoping that our numbers actually confirm that.
Yeah, so, thank you. And I do want to confirm, the, numbers, provided, on the DPI website are submitted by New Hanover County Schools. So there's no other data collection process other than, our principals are coding and then verifying, and then, once that data at the end of every year is, reviewed for errors, because DPI runs it through a statistical process to pull out any errors, those are cleaned up, and then it's submitted. And then once, DPI confirms that the data is clean, then they, report it out. So it's all the same data. And, data provided from, Love Our Children is also from New Hanover County Schools, being that it's, coming from public records requests. So the data source is the same. And yes, while it is not a violation of policy for the principal to choose the coding sometimes that principals have chosen has been a less severe code, but they're applying the OSS that matches the definitions in policy for assault, for weapon, for drugs, that kind of thing. So the direction that has been provided to principals is to code according to that policy level that matches the narrative. If in your narrative it clearly describes an assault and you are choosing to suspend a student out of school based on assault, you need to code as assault. So, and assault's the main one. We don't have somewhere they had a weapon or something and they're saying, well, that was just a lower level threat. It's really assault because sometimes they're coding it as aggressive behavior or fighting when really it needs a higher standard of assault. So that's the direction we've given. They haven't violated policy. We've explained that this was their determination and kind of their right to make that coding decision, but in the most transparency, it needs to line up specifically with policy. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In regards to a motion, Mr. Vogel, Bradford said move this forward without any changes. That would just simply be what we already have. Is that correct? So that would not require a motion or a vote?
Well, it's on your agenda. I suppose you could move to table it or move to postpone it to a definite time period.
Well, Ms. Bradford made a motion to move it forward to the board, as, without any changes. Is that at this point necessary, since it already is in policy? If there are no changes, the board would not have to vote on it at all.
I understand your question. No, I'd say that's not necessary.
Okay, so we don't need the motion, we don't need a vote.
Which is safe, we talked about it and it's standing.
Status quo. I mean, and I'm just gonna take my last minute here of this. I think that the change is necessary, but the will of the board is not to change it. The will of the board is not to change it.